Hey, good evening, brothers and sisters. This is Peter from Flashpoint 726, and I decided to do a little something different tonight and take you all by the side of my campfire I've got going on in the back of my yard, and I thought it'd be kind of a fitting thing to do on a cold winter's night. It's about 25 degrees out here. I just love this weather. I love having a campfire. Some stars are coming out. It's kind of cloudy, but there's a few stars poking out. But just wanted to do this lesson in front of a nice little campfire. So I hope you enjoy it. And so tonight I wanted to share a little bit more of the knowledge and the speech that I've been hearing from the heavens. As Psalms 19, 1 through 2 declares, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge." So there's been a lot of signs in the sky in the last few years. And I hope you watched my first couple of videos on the end times clock. Plenty of signs in there. And my intent was just to kind of give a broad overview of all those events that are going to take place. I did not cover the blood moons or much of it in that presentation. If it did, it was just kind of coincidental to what I was presenting. But this is almost a topic that stands alone in of itself. But it's a very important one, and I think these blood moons that the tetrad and what I'm calling the triad that has occurred last January. We're going to have basically 3 blood moons within a year. Excuse me. And I think these blood moons are very prophetic. One, I think they pointed towards and got our attention to the Revelation 12 sign, specifically the tetrad, and they also confirm the things that are going to happen down the road here, what I believe in a couple years, but it could happen sooner than that. So I just wanted to let's just get right into it, okay? All right, so just kind of an overview of the 7 blood moons. So we had a tetrad that started in 15 April of 2014, and that happened on a Passover day. And then later that fall, we had another blood moon during Sukkot, and then the following year, another Passover blood moon, and this one actually happened to fall in between Good Friday and Easter, and it was a very memorable blood moon for me. I didn't get to see the entire thing, but the moon was setting where I lived, and I got to see a partial eclipse as it was going down the horizon. And I'll talk about some of my personal thoughts that I had that day a little later. And then finally, the tetrad concluded on 28 September on Sukkot. So that completed the tetrad. And then about 726 days later, we had the Revelation 12 sign. And sorry, I'm trying to get over a cold. And 2 or 3 months after that, we had the triad blood moons kicked off in 31 January of 2018. And that was a super blood blue moon. So that was I thought it was pretty remarkable. I hadn't even looked into what was coming in terms of further blood moons at that point. So I just thought it was kind of a remarkable thing that was occurring. And in America, we had not seen a blood blue moon since 1866. So it seemed like a very infrequent event. And then last summer, on the 27th of July, we had another blood moon, that coincided with a Mars opposition. And it wasn't just any Mars opposition. It was a Mars opposition that occurred near perihelion, which basically means the closest point in Mars' orbit around the sun. And so when you have a Mars opposition or perihelion, that actually happens to be one of the closest approaches Mars makes to Earth. And then finally, what's to come here in January, the 21st, is another blood moon that that occurs right when Jupiter and Venus are conjuncting. So you can see these are some pretty spectacular blood moons that have occurred, the last 7. And each one in itself is just kind of, I guess on its own, it's kind of a coincidence. Not really, but, noteworthy. But to have 7 of these blood moons to fall on these specific, festival dates or astronomical, coinciding with other astronomical events is just amazing in my mind. So this is just a stellarium snapshot of the blood moon. So getting deep, kind of digging in here now. So the 2014-15 lunar eclipse tetrad, this is a very rare event. And I know a lot of people in the prophetic community were talking about how this was the 7th tetrad since Jesus' birth. At the time, I took everyone's word for it, what everyone was proclaiming. But later on, I actually did my own research, and unfortunately, there weren't any tetrads that occurred around Jesus' birth or his death. So I was a little disappointed when I discovered that. And then I started digging, and when I discovered that, I just started digging a little bit more. 1492 seemed to be like a big event, especially when, you had Christopher Columbus sailing, but I also think that the Jewish people were expelled from Spain. And so there was claims that there was a lunar tetrad during that time. Well, after doing a little bit of fact checking, a lot of those things just didn't occur. And a lot of the tetrads that they were claiming happened weren't really, they weren't tetrads that fell on, Passover days. It's, when you study this really closely, in order to have a Passover occur on a full moon, the timing has to be just right. I think there's like only, when the new moon occurs, which starts the counting of the days of the month. I believe it's Nisan. I'm not very up on my Jewish calendar, but I think it's Nisan, that the first of Nisan. So that new moon has to occur within a very short period of time, like within a 5-hour span. If it doesn't occur, then for a blood moon to occur, I believe on the 15th of Nisan, you're going to miss the window for a blood moon to happen on the 15th of Nisan, which is Passover. So when I look back, I only saw one instance in the last 2,000 years, and I didn't really dig too deep into it because I was able to throw out many other dates that were claimed but really did not fall on Passover. There was a possibility that one occurred in the 3rd century. So, and then when I looked into the events that were claimed to have happened in, I believe, 49 and 50 and 67, 68, those actually did not, both of the Passover dates actually did not fall on Passover. So I threw those out. So there were tetrads that occurred after Israel's birth as a nation, and it occurred, one blood moon had occurred right before Israel had taken over Jerusalem in 1967, but it wasn't a tetrad that fell purely on feast days. So that's a little bit of fact checking, a little bit of background for those who have followed that. And I only say all this not to knock, what others may have presented. I just want to emphasize how rare this event is. And I believe the Lord was using this event to wake up the church to look for all the wonders that he's going to place in the sky in the next 10 to 11 years, what I believe are the next 10 to 11 years. Hopefully we're not around for that entire period of time, but I think it was to wake everybody up, and I think it had that effect, but it certainly wasn't the rapture, and we know that today. So I'm going to be using some Strong's numbers in this presentation. I try not to get too wrapped up into Strong's numbers and that type of numerology, but and I only use it, when it's, remarkable. I try to use it sparingly, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But in a lot of these signs, I cannot deny the messages that are being conveyed in my mind, and I believe what the Lord has used Strong's for is to really communicate some strong messages in the dates and the days between different signs, and I'm going to go through that, and you might be as blown away as I am when you put all this stuff together. So just starting off, the tetrad spanned 531 days. Strong's for 531 is inviolable or unchangeable. It means it's immutable. So when I saw that, what I felt the Spirit telling me was he has, the end times are set. You can't, it's not going to change. Nothing's going to turn it back. We are on a glide slope towards our, the rapture, our redemption, doing away with the nations, basically, and installing his kingdom on earth, the millennial reign of Jesus. So the tetrad, first of all, just had that message. So I just found that amazing. And then, so that was the span of the tetrads from the first to the last blood moon of the tetrad. And then it was also that the tetrad ended 726 days prior to the Revelation 12 sign. And so Strong 726 is the Greek word for harpazo, which is the rapture, which you get from Latin, which is rapturo. And it literally means to snatch up. And you see that in Revelation 12:5, where the male child is snatched up to heaven and to God's throne. So that's pretty amazing. And the other thing that I found very interesting, and I really wanted it to be 1260 days, but the amount of time between the first blood moon and the Revelation 12 great sign is 1257 days. Now you'll see a lot of people out there claiming it's 1260. What I would encourage you to do is get on a date and time calculator and calculate out the days. It's by no stretch of the imagination 1260 days. So I'm a little disappointed when people say it's 1260 days because they're kind of stretching the truth or not doing their homework. It was 1257 days. But as we go through this thing, I think there's a progression here, and even though it's not 1260 days, I think God is still doing something pretty amazing. Okay, so I just wanted to show this table here, which are the lunar eclipses in this decade. And so you can see, a few lines down where the tetrad occurred. Everywhere where you see in the third column total, that's the total eclipse. You can also see the times in the second to last column. So in this decade, you can see that, started off with 2 lunar eclipses, and then about 3 years went by before another one happened, and then we had our tetrad, and then we had about 3 years passed, maybe 2.5, and then we had our triad. Now, there are no more blood moons predicted to occur before what I believe is the rapture sign, which is 20 December of 20. There's certainly blood moons that will occur during the tribulation, but these 7 blood moons, I believe, are a wake-up call, if you will, that points to the end and the start of the tribulation, the end of the church age and the start of the tribulation. And so I also wanted to kind of lay some foundation just to kind of give you an overview how these tetrads tend to go in cycles over the centuries. They kind of like vacillate between 3 centuries where there's, a bit of activity, and a bit of activity is, maybe 6 or 7 in a year. And then you'll have a period where there's very little tetrads. And so scrolling down here, going all the way, so the very last row is the century that we're in. So before the 1900s, there was literally 0 tetrads for 3 centuries. And then we had 5 last century, and then there's projected to be 8 this century. And I believe 2003, there was a tetrad. And the tetrad that we saw in 2014 is the second one for this century. But I believe it's the last one, at least under the current, under this current age. All right, so getting back to the tetrad a little bit, and I'm going to focus on the 3rd and 4th blood moon because there are a lot of interesting alignments with that. So the 3rd blood moon occurred on April 4th, 2015 and lasted 4 minutes and 44 seconds. So just all the occurrences of 4, it would have been interesting if this happened in 2014, but it happened in 2015. But the 3rd blood moon happened on 4/4 and lasted 4 minutes and 44 seconds. So the Lord's trying to say something here with all these 4s. 4, as I've studied the Bible, is a biblical representation of reign or sovereignty. I really derive most of this. Well, you talk about the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 corners of a kingdom. But what really nails it in for me is the 4 creatures that surround God's throne. So there's 4, when you read Revelation, when you read Ezekiel, there's these 4 heavenly creatures that surround God's throne and goes everywhere he goes. And I believe this is a representation of his sovereignty. Triple numbers represent the fullness and perfection or completion of whatever a single number represents. So in this case, 444 represents the fullness of the Lord's sovereignty. So we see this 3rd blood moon with the number 444 on it. And I think what this is proclaiming is that the fullness of the Lord's sovereignty and his reign is coming. And the other thing that just blew me away with this eclipse and really was very personal for me was it occurred right between Good Friday and Easter, which, if you're really celebrating that holiday, that's kind of like during that period where he's died. He hasn't yet risen. He's down in Hades. He's separated from God. He's down in Hades preaching the gospel. And to me, it's like he was doing a good thing, but he was separated from his Father. And, the tears that he had to suffer in the Garden of Gethsemane, I always imagine that this was like the only period in his existence that he had to be separated from his Father. So he had to do this so that we wouldn't have to even like spend a day in Hades. And so it really struck me that day as I was watching the moon set in the west, because on the East Coast you can only see part of the penumbra or whatever. So I only got to see about half of it fulfilled as it was setting. But it just felt very prophetic to me and a reminder to me what Jesus had to suffer. And I would have to say that even a day separated from the Lord, from God the Father, must have been a very difficult thing for him to do. And I just praised him for it, for making that sacrifice for me and making that sacrifice for everyone. So that was kind of my personal experience with this blood moon. So then later this fall, going into the fourth blood moon, this occurred on September 28th, and it lasted 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 55 seconds. I'm like, Lord, you keep throwing some triple numbers in here, and it's just amazing, just how the details of these blood moons, how precise, and he could have made it 112 or and some like 52 or something, but he's got this thing calibrated down to the second. He's wound up the clock, and he's got messages in every aspect of his creation. So 111 biblically represents a completed work, as I understand it. And on a lot of these numbers, if there's interest, I'll also do videos on how I've come to understand these things, and which I'd be happy to share. But I'm just sharing with you right now, at least what I have understood certain numbers to be. So 111 represents a completed work, and certainly this blood moon marked the completion of the tetrad. So on one level, it certainly marked the end. And it just kind of confirms this as a prophetic sign for the age. So we had a tetrad that has completed. It's a completed work. It's inviolable, as Strong's 561, I believe, communicated. So all these things put together just make this whole tetrad undeniable that the Lord has got something in motion. And 5 represents grace. And so 55 for the second hand, I believe, represents an intensified grace. So he is going to pour out his grace. The fulfillment of his grace certainly has not happened, but I think as we start getting closer towards the rapture, and even in the tribulation, I think you're going to see an intensification of his grace as the Antichrist and the beast comes to power. There are going to be a lot of people, persecuted for those who turn to the Lord during that time. And I think you're going to see his grace being poured out more and more as Satan ramps up his attacks. And then finally, the tetrad, this was a supermoon, and the previous 3 were not supermoons at all. So this just kind of like made it for me like a capstone event, that this is the end, at least for the tetrad. And it's just confirmation upon confirmation, and it's a line of demarcation for the Revelation 12 sign, as we see in the 726, the number of days between the end of the tetrad and the great sign that we see 726 days later. Just briefly, I'm going to touch upon this. I've made another video on the Great American Eclipse, but I just want to bring this out because there was a major message about 33 between the Revelation 12 sign in the Great American Eclipse. And at 33, I believe, represents Jesus. And it points to Jesus, and everything about, you know, and also represents promise. Just represents, you know, what, you know, Jesus is coming, you know, to claim his own, and to basically defeat Satan, and to come and reign on this earth. So I'm not going to get too deep into that. Reference my earlier video for more info, and if you still have questions, I'll be happy to answer anything you might have, or I might do another video on that. Okay, so now we've completed the tetrad. We've covered that. It's a, you know, it's a capstone event that marks and points our attention to the start of the Revelation signs, Revelation 12, Revelation 15, and, you know, and other chapters, I'm sure. So now I want to focus on the lunar triad. So now the lunar triad certainly doesn't fall on any feast days. Sorry, I just heard a big booming sound, and I think it's just an aircraft traveling at high speed. Anyways, so the lunar triad. So I think even though it didn't fall on feast days, it in a way far surpasses anything prophetic about the tetrad. The tetrad was there to get our attention and to start looking at the signs in the skies, the things that Jesus talks about in Luke 21, that there will be signs in the heavens and the earth in the last days. And so I think these are some remarkable signs, so let's get right into it. First of all, each blood moon, as I said before, is marked with a rare astronomical alignment, confirming its significance in God's end-time clock. And we have the first blood moon that happened last January. And for reference, I'm calling it the Triad 1. So Triad 1 is the first blood moon, Triad 2 is the second, Triad 3 is the third. And that's going to just be some shorthand I'm going to use. So the first blood moon was a super blood blue moon. And as I've looked into, it's actually very hard to get any data on this. There was a super blood moon that occurred in the Eastern Hemisphere in 1982, but it didn't happen around the world. This one pretty much happened to about 99% of the population in this world. But regardless, it's something that if you calculate the probabilities, treating everything as a random event, this is something that occurs once a century. And if you look back to the 1866 event, which they said is the last time it happened in America, it actually wasn't a super blood blue moon. It was just a blood blue moon. So this is kind of a conservative estimate, once a century, but so it just kind of gives you a gauge of how often this type of event happens. And so so we're talking about the septad now, which is the tetrad and the triad put together. And so I'm counting the number of days from the beginning of the first blood moon. And you'll see and so I'm going to be looking at the Strong's numbers and meanings for the number of days that's the point of reference I'm using. So this first blood moon occurred 1,387 days from the start of the tetrad. And the Strong's 1387 means to lure or bait. Now, this doesn't really, I'm going to just say it right now. I don't know what this means, but later on, this comes up again with a different number. And so I think there's something that the Lord is trying to communicate here. There's a message that I have not been able to interpret yet. Holy Spirit just hasn't given it to me yet. Or maybe he's waiting for someone else to study this. But I believe this is confirmed later on, and I'll show you later. So the second blood moon, Triad 2, occurred last summer, and this coincided with a Mars opposition. I don't know if you guys had looked out on the summer night sky this past June or July, but Mars was it was big. I mean, when I first saw it, I thought it was a star I had not really recognized before, but it was so brilliant, and it would basically be right in the middle of the night sky, when the sun set. And it was almost kind of eerie. I was just wondering if it was like some huge meteor that was going to come strike the earth. It was just so remarkable. But once I started busting out my phone and sky map and all that good stuff, I discovered that was actually Mars. But I didn't really understand why it was so large, and so I did some research, and it was basically making a close approach to Earth. And so it just so happens that Mars was at its closest point when the lunar tetrad, not lunar tetrad, sorry, the second blood moon occurred. And so when I looked at the probability of just a lunar, a blood moon, lunar eclipse, and Mars being in opposition, which happens about once every 2 years, the chances of this occurring is like a once in every 10,000 year event. But for this to occur near perihelion, where you also have Mars coming to its closest approach, which this happens approximately every 15 or 17 years, this event makes it 8 times rarer. So we're possibly looking at an event that would only occur if the Earth was allowed, the Earth and the solar system, the heavens and the cosmos was allowed to continue, something that would only happen once in every 100,000 years. So this, you cannot deny God's hand in all this. So the other amazing aspect of the second blood moon was it was 1,564 days from the tetrad start. So Strong's 1564 means an embryo, an unfinished vessel. If you've studied the Revelation 12 sign and the conception and really dug deep into the Greek for what the church is and what occurred at Pentecost, we're actually an embryo that's developing. We have not yet been born yet into our body. The head of Christ has been born and gone to heaven, and now we await the body of Christ to be born, to be united as one. So having that understanding of that sign and what it means, this is just amazing. And so a lot of people were disappointed back in September when the rapture didn't happen. But this was a comforting message to me that no, that did come and pass, but we're still waiting for our birth. It was a sign. It pointed to our birth. And so this was just a message of encouragement that we're unfinished, that the Lord still has a little bit more work before we're going to be taken home. So, so here's a snapshot of this blood moon in Mars. Oh yeah, that was the other aspect of it. I felt like this was almost like a double lunar eclipse event, because when there's a lunar eclipse, it turns red, and then Mars is also red. So it's almost like we had 2 blood moons, and you can see where they were in relationship to each other. They were basically right aligned with each other. And I don't remember if I had inclement weather, because I did not get to personally view this, or if it was just something that was occurring in the Eastern Hemisphere. I just remember I wasn't able to see it, but I did want to see this like double, like Mars, the largest that you're ever going to see it, almost. 2003 actually was a little bit larger. But basically, you're seeing Mars in its full glory, so to speak, and the moon red. So just this event happening at once, it's almost like a 2-for-1 lunar eclipse type of deal. So if you got to see it, I am jealous. All right, so moving on to the third blood moon, what I'll call triad 3, which is going to occur, in about a month and a half. So this is the third supermoon. So the super blood moon was the first, or well, the end of the tetrad was the first. The second was the previous January with the super blood blue moon, and here's the third. So I find the number 3 very interesting, because that kind of represents, the divine order, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then also 7 is the 7th blood moon, which is, a divine number for completion. And as I say, this is confirmation upon confirmation upon confirmation over this being a completion sign. So, so the other, I'm just overwhelmed with all the things how all these things are just aligned, and I just keep reading down. I'm like, wow, I just keep forgetting about this. So the supermoon coincides with the Venus-Jupiter conjunction. So I calculated how often Venus and Jupiter conjunct, which is approximately 1 in every 300 years or so. But to have a supermoon coincide with a Venus and Jupiter conjunction, this is a once in a 20,000 year event. And what makes this a little bit longer than the previous Mars opposition is that this is a supermoon and the other one wasn't. Super blood moon. And so the significance of this, I believe in this end times clock, Venus represents Jesus, because he refers to himself in Revelation as the morning star. And Jupiter, I believe, represents the body of Christ, the church that was born out of Virgo. And so when they come together, I think it's, you have to take a close look at what's going on the clock. And I believe this is, the head and the body coming together as one. So to have this occur, to have the tetrad and the triad, which I'm calling the septad, which means 7, to have this happen on the very last blood moon points to something happening to the head and the body of Christ when they come together. So what else could it be other than pointing to our rapture? Now, I will say that if there is a sign before the rapture sign that I've detailed in my previous videos that points to our rapture, it is this one. And the only thing that makes me hesitate on thinking that we are going to get rapture on this one I guess I'll get into it here in a moment, but the other things that I believe God has confirmed in the days and the messages of the days in relationship to the rapture sign. So the other thing I want to point out here in this constellation is where Venus and Jupiter are. It's like Ophiuchus, I believe, represents Michael, and he's fighting the snake. There's a war going on in heaven. And so it's kind of like we are in between his thighs. We're like in a protected place. So I just find this positioning to be very interesting, that we're kind of like hiding in the refuge of Michael as he's fighting the dragon in heaven. Okay, so now getting into some Strong's days. So 1742 days from the tetrad start, and this could support, again, a January 21st rapture, means outer garment cloak. So, reading Revelation, what does everyone wear? Everyone's clothed in white, of one form or another, white robe or clothed in linen. You see it everywhere throughout Revelation. So this completion sign, to me, foretells and prophesies of our heavenly garments that we're going to wear. I mean, this is kind of the final thing. This, the seventh blood moon has been completed. It is finished. And what are we going to put on now that it's finished? It will be these white clothing. So it's just amazing how these numbers just come together like this. And I don't think it's by accident. I think the Lord, in His sovereignty, controls all these things, and He knows what we're going to look for when we're going to look for Him, and He can put this stuff in place well ahead of time, knowing exactly the message He's going to send. He's sovereign. It's just amazing at the depths that this goes and the detail. So just a few verses from Revelation about our garments. Fine linen, bright and clean, was given her to wear. And this is talking about the bride of Christ. Fine linen stands for the righteous acts of God's holy people. And what are the armies wearing coming down out of heaven? The armies of heaven were following Him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. And then finally, and this is talking about tribulation saints, and He said, "These are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." So I've punctuated it. It is finished. So the amazing thing about the timing of this is it is exactly 700 days until the rapture sign of 21 December 20. I mean, can you believe that? 700 days? I mean, this is crazy. So again, 7 represents, biblically represents divine completion. And I believe 100 is an amplifying function of 7. So whenever you see 700 or 600, it's an amplifying function of the number that's before it. So it's not a fullness or completion like a 777 would be, but it's probably the next closest thing to it. And the other amazing thing about 700 days, and you can check this out in date and time calculator, it translates into 1 year at 11 months exactly. So what's 111? We saw it before in the tetrad, at the completion of the tetrad. Here he is at the end of the septad, at the end of the triad, at the end of the seventh blood moon. He's got 111 written here again, which again represents a completed work. So these 7 blood moons represent, I believe, when I say it is finished, just as Jesus said it is finished on the cross, I believe this is a sign. I believe it's a sign, but if it's finished on the 21st of January, I'm not gonna argue with him. I'm gonna go. But it's just amazing what he's written into this whole septad. So I believe the heavens are pouring forth speech and teaching us about the last days. As I talked about Psalms 19, about the skies pouring forth speech, and by day, and then the night time bringing forth knowledge. It's true. I mean, just look at it all. Just look at all these amazing things that are, it's just so rich. When you look to the Lord's creation and the way He's wound up the clock and the stories that are involved in all this, it's just we have an amazing God that we serve. And this just makes me just be in more of awe and in love with Him. So I guess I'm doing a review here. I put this stuff together and sometimes I forget what I did, but so this is just kind of a recap of, okay, so what I'm getting into is a Feast of Trumpets. So I'm deviating a little bit, but it's just to paint the larger picture of just what's going on here. So I'm going to be looking at the Revelation 12 sign and Feast of Trumpet dates. So the first what I'm calling Feast of Trumpets 1, the Great Sign, which is, what most people are familiar with, is the 23 September 17 sign. And here you have, Virgo with the sun at her, being clothed in the sun, the moon at her feet. Jupiter has been born. I actually believe Jupiter was born a week or two before, and there's a prophecy in Isaiah that talks about being born before going into labor. And then up above her, you have the crown of 12 stars. You have the 9 stars of Leo, and then you have the 3 planets aligning to form a crown. All right, so I think, this first Feast of Trumpets was another significant date in the end times clock. And from it, I'm measuring the different days of the Feast of Trumpets that occur after it. So we just passed 9/11 this year, which was Feast of Trumpets 2. And the number of days between the first and the second Feast of Trumpets is 354 days. Strong's 354 is a taking up. So we had a harpazo, 726 from the tetrad to the Feast of Trumpets 1 sign, and we just got a further confirmation here. So make no mistake, the Lord is, this was not a coincidence. The Lord's confirming what he's put into place. Feast of Trumpets 3 is going to occur next October, 1st of October 19. And when I put down these dates, it's the second day, because Feast of Trumpets spans two days. So these are the second days. The number of days from Feast of Trumpets 1 to 3 is 738 days from the Great Sign. Strong 738 means a newborn. Can you believe this? Oh, and I got a little story about this. It's in Hebrew, it also means a lion. So I have a very good friend, Brian, who just became a grandparent, and his daughter's name was named Uriah, which means a lion or lioness. And I didn't know anything about that. And so one day, I think it was just right after 9/11, for some reason we weren't down about it. We were still kind of encouraged and all that. So I said, hey, Brian, look up 738 in Strong's. And then he returned this big smile. So turns out he had no clue of what I was referencing. I thought maybe he would figure out that 738 and the days from the Great Sign, he'd figure it out. But he immediately went to, how did you figure this out? Because his daughter was visiting him from England with her newborn, Uriah, and he was just blown away that he had this, that he had his granddaughter that was a newborn, and her name was Uriah, which is lion. So it was just it was just kind of a personal moment with me and my friend, but God is just always amazing me, and he kind of created that little amazement there. So I just thought I'd share that little story. But again, a newborn, so it's pointing to our birth. That is going to happen here, if not January, the following year in December. So Feast of Trumpets 4, this is going to happen on 20 September 20. I find the number of 20s here interesting, 9/20, 2020. I don't know the significance of that beyond the triple number there. But it is 1,093 days from the Great Sign. And okay, this part I don't really get too much. It means earth in Greek, or tribute. But I just wanted to present it in case someone else had, some insight on that. I could always make something up, but I truly don't have insight what that means in terms of, the end times. And then on 21 December 20, that is 1,185 days from the Great Sign, and the Strong's 1185, which I find interesting, there's two Greek words for this. It means to lure or to bait. So if you remember, let me go back here a second. On the, I think it was the second blood moon. No, that was, oh yeah, it was the first blood moon. 1387 is the same thing. So I'd normally almost like try to hide that and bury it, but the Lord confirmed it twice in these dates. So if you've got some insight, I'd really love to hear about it. It's one of these, mysteries that I ponder, and, the Lord doesn't always explain everything. And so I just find that interesting. So the Hebrew for 1185, moving on, means a son of delight. And I put daughter because I think it universally applies to both. So I think this just shows, how Jesus sees us. He sees us as sons and daughters of delight, or at least the Father. We're going to be the bride and, be joined with Him. And, through Him, He's going to delight in us. So, I just found that just very encouraging, and, I felt the love there, if you will. Okay, so I am probably wrapping this up here, but there's other things I just wanted, since we're talking about the septad and the, man, there is a bright star out there. I wonder if it's Venus. It can't be Venus. Anyways, sorry for that interruption. I'm outside in God's creation, and just sometimes I can't help it. But I did want to bring out some of these other things, these other signs that have occurred that are just extremely prophetic. They don't fall into the Feast of Trumpets or the blood moons, but I just want to throw these out there because it's just amazing, all the things that are going on. So the conception comet, if you saw my first video, there's a conception comet in relationship to Virgo. And so between that and the great sign, which is the Revelation 12 sign, there are 310 days. Strong's 310 is to cry out. If you go back to Revelation 12, it talks about she was pregnant and cried out in pain. I mean, who else can do this? You can't make this stuff up. So the Lord is just awesome. Praise God. I love Him. There's just so much richness into the wonders and the, and all the detail that and the lengths He goes to. And the last thing that I just wanted to talk about was the spacing of what I call like milestones in the end times timeline. So it all starts with the tetrad. So the tetrad began in 2014. So the number of days that we talked about before between the tetrad start and the great sign was 1,257 days. Now, the next two things, you're going to have to go to my previous videos and watch to get these dates. But the number of days between the great sign and the two witnesses sign, which occurs in March of 2021, is 1,258 days. And then from the two witnesses sign to the second beast sign, which is where I believe the Antichrist gains his power, the two witnesses are put to death, and then the tribulation, where the second half of the tribulation is entered, is 1,259 days. And this last part, I have not identified anything specifically, but just just pointing out the sequence of, we have 1257, 1258, 1259, so there must be another sign that's 1,260 days from there. So, so even though these signs aren't exactly 1,260 days apart, I believe God's communicating something in the sequence. All right, so wrapping this up. Thank you, everyone. First of all, if you've made it this far, I am greatly encouraged when you all watch my videos. Please leave, a comment, a word of encouragement, a like, whatever. I do really appreciate everything that you all throw my way. it just encourages me to keep going on. So that wasn't my last thing though, but I just wanted to throw that in there before I conclude. I'm just throwing this one out here, and I'd like to get your comments on this. But as I was going through there, Revelation 12 has 2 signs in there, but there's something in Revelation 15 that is referred to as the great and marvelous sign. And I'll read it right here. I saw in heaven another great and marvelous sign, 7 angels and 7 last plagues, last because with them God's wrath is completed. Sorry, coughed a little bit there. Revelation 15:1. So, my question I'd like to pose to you, and I'm hoping a lot of you make it this far, could the 7 blood moons point to the 7 angels and the 7 plagues? Even though those things aren't happening here, but I would like to know, are blood moons actually kind of ominous signs for things that are coming? Are they ominous signs for judgments? And so we have just witnessed something utterly amazing, a tetrad that could arguably may have been the only thing that has happened after Christ's death. And then you have this very rare tetrad, but even if it has occurred with such rich messages that are contained within them, and the connection to the Revelation 12 sign? I don't think so. And then you have the triad, which you have a 1 in century event, followed by a 1 in 10,000 year event, followed by a 1 in 20,000 year event, all 3 in a row. The probability is probably 1 in a billion, if you're talking probability. So God, being the author of this universe, writing his messages in his creation in the way he has, could this be this great and marvelous sign? I can't think of anything that's more great and marvelous than this. I hope that I've been able to do this justice, but this is just astounding. And then lastly, there are almost 1,200 or 2,520 days between the first blood moon and the 2 witnesses sign. Could it be that God is taking us through a prophetic week of signs before the actual tribulation? So that's what has gotten me thinking, is God actually giving us a year of 7 years of signs before the tribulation actually happens? I find it, pretty compelling that maybe he is. That this whole thing is a foreshadowing of the things that are going to occur in March of 2021. And hopefully by that time, many of us will be raptured, but for those who are left behind, which I believe there will be, well, I don't know what my point was there, but I believe that the ones that are left behind will be given a portion of power, and they have a critical role in the tribulation. So, yeah, those are just some questions I just want to pose out there. What do you think? Do you think that God may be giving us 7 years of signs before he actually brings the tribulation upon this earth? And could this, these 7 blood moons actually be the great and marvelous sign that points to the bowl judgments that are going to occur? But, this is happening kind of, late into the season of signs. So I'm just curious if you think this could actually be that sign. So that's all I've got. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into my channel. I do hope to make this a place of fellowship and encouragement. And if I made a video before, just kind of a little fireside chat. So I do hope that you eventually just kind of join, subscribe, and join in the conversation, the discovery, and join me on the journey that I'm taking in discovering the mysteries and the depth of God's wonders and His love. So God bless you all. I love you all. I really do. And till next time, Peter signing out.